I wanted to announce that Kert Davies is joining End of Petroleum. End of Petroleum is pushing forward the hydrino energy industry, and Kert, with his experience in environment and climate, we think could be a big part of that. Kert, do you want to talk to us about your experience?
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me to join the project. My name is Kert Davies. I've been working in environmental advocacy work here in Washington, D.C. for about 25 years. About 21 of those on climate specifically. And I worked for 13 years at Greenpeace as the research director. I now run an organization called Climate Investigation Center, which has focused on mainly the bad guys who's trying to stop climate solutions and their history, and exposing some of the ongoing deliberate confusion that's being sown around climate change. So this is in the category of solutions, which I love, and I'm really happy to be working on it.
Your experience with Blacklight Power, one of the companies working on hydrino energy, formerly Blacklight Power.
Right.
Maybe you could talk to us about just what you saw there, and just how
right.
it sort of impacted you.
So the very first time I met someone from Blacklight Power, I think was in 2002 or 2003 at a conference, and the gentleman came up to me and said, "Oh, you work for Greenpeace. Have you ever thought about how far the opposition will go to stop solutions that would displace it? Disruptive technology." I think it was at a hydrogen meeting, actually, some sort of a meeting, and really provocative question, right? Like, how far will they go to block solutions? So we started a dialogue, and I soon took my first trip up to the lab in New Jersey, and was blown away by Randy's rap, his brilliance, his obvious passion for his work, and then was shown plasma cells operating. Actually saw it working. I have a pretty good science background, but unable to disprove it myself. I thought, this is the biggest story around. It's either an amazing story of a really well orchestrated fraud, or it's the biggest thing ever invented. And I chose to believe the latter. I still do. And now, this many years later, I've been to that laboratory probably 4 or 5 times, taken different parties there, introduced them to people, and it continues to grow. And they are, they're making amazing progress. So hurry up is what I always say when I leave. But it's a remarkable thing, and your research is also remarkable. What you found in other places in the world, in other laboratories who are following suit.
Oh, absolutely. Like I think I was telling Kert that, and he didn't know this because you're not maybe tracking his science like we are, but because of our understanding in hydrino energy, we were invited into a laboratory. It's in Canada. There's some information on it on the web publicly, but not everything. It's called Sapphire, and one of the funders of that laboratory is connected to Lockheed Martin, and not to say that Lockheed Martin is funding it, but that I think it's a foundation is funding it, and they're studying it because it's real.
Right.
And
right.
We've seen it, and they've even confirmed that they're getting really high energy densities that that no other chemistry, no chemical reaction can get.
Yeah. So I remember coming back from my first visit to the lab, sort of blown away, mesmerized, and with a poster of the model of the molecule, some of the diagrams of what Randy has described, and it sort of strikes people as too far-fetched. It's hard to believe, and because it's so new, describing it to people, you can see the look in their eyes that they trust you, they don't really believe it. And it's an interesting feeling with colleagues who definitely leaned on me for scientific information, and as the research director, I was fact-checking a lot of things that Greenpeace was doing, and then I'm suddenly talking about this brand new, novel form of hydrogen that doesn't burn, and so I had to take a couple more people up from the organization who were skeptical, and then they came back and said, it really God bless them if it's true, really, right?
Yeah.
And please let it be. So,
You know, I've talked to scientists.
Yeah.
We invite them to our, was in Boston recently, invite them to our presentation. Some of them, when you talk to them, they're like, they'll walk with you to a certain point,
right.
but then they stop walking.
Yep.
You know, when you went and saw it in the lab, it became, you were seeing it, you were feeling it, you could feel
Right.
the energy, you see the
But
energy.
it still doesn't
energy.
fit anything you've ever been taught. I think
Yeah.
that the discontinuity there is that, you know, a professional scientist who's done many years of scholastic studies in physics, in chemistry, it doesn't fit what you were taught to under, you know, the you know, what they've discovered as they explain it is a new thing. And so it interrupts you know, the doctrine that you have in your head about physics or about molecules, I mean, atoms, right? And the way I always describe it to, you know, to my mom or my brother or a layperson is that they're making the hydrogen atom burp, you know, just sort of like flex and give off energy, and then it becomes a slightly smaller version of itself that it hasn't been destroyed. And that kind of makes sense to some people, but that's not scientific. That's not really, you know, to a physicist that makes no sense. To a chemist, it's like, okay, you know. But and then the coolest thing that I've heard from the brilliant light people is how engineers click on it. Right? They don't have that stigma of a chemist or a physicist, and they just go, well, this is happening, and then a ton of heat and light is coming out of this thing.
Like,
give it to me.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm
like,
ready.
I'm ready. I'll do something with that. I know
Yeah.
exactly what to do with lots of heat and lots of light.
Right.
And they don't really care, right? They don't have blockages. So, you know, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take people dropping their guard. So,
And,
you know, the other remarkable thing was they had no environmental vocabulary, and this is no, you know, slight at the team, but they really weren't thinking that way. They weren't thinking about the environmental implications. They were thinking about the business implications. The sort of, you know, they had figures in their PowerPoint slides about the growth in electricity demand and the price of electricity, and they said, we can beat that price. We can make cheaper electricity. And I kind of had to interrupt and say, but that's not really the price of carbon-free electricity. It's worth much more, right? Because the price of electricity now doesn't include all the externalities, including climate change and health impacts, and, you know, all the harm that's caused, and all the burden that the public bears, and the subsidies to fossil fuels, 100 years of subsidies. So they didn't really have that in their heads. They just thought, we can make a cheaper source of electricity, cheaper power plant. And it was fairly naive in a way, cute in a way, that they didn't know these things. And I kind of was like, whoa, there's a whole different formula here. If you actually can create megawatts of carbon-free electricity, you are going to be millionaires. Like, this is what the world is waiting for.
Yeah.
It's really not. So I didn't say it in a snarky way. I was just like, you're underestimating the value of this, because there is a global crisis waiting to be solved.
Right, and there are people working on those numbers. I'm sure you've.
Oh yeah, now I mean, and it's even more urgent. You know, whatever it is, 16 years later, you know, we've gone over the cliff. We are beyond a normal climate for the future as we know it, and so now we're talking about emergency measures like carbon capture techniques and reburying the carbon that we've released, which is super expensive, energy intensive, and really far-fetched to try to think about the scale that would be needed to mop it up. Because, you know, the world is waiting for this, and it's here. You know, it's happening. And I guess what your project is tantalizing, the tantalizing aspect is that, you know, we need to just tell the story. We need to tell people, get people ready for what is now an inevitable change.